welcome everyone to the first edition of September's series of CED Office Hour Live. This is put on weekly by the Community and Economic Development Team at Central State University Extension. Those include Ambrose Moses, Amber Twitty, and myself, Eric Smith. For this session, I'll be your main moderator, and I'll talk about in a minute what the main topic is. So we do these weekly, and it's about all things community and economic development. So we cover everything from topics from everything from the human and social side of the work of working in communities to infrastructure and built environments to everything in between, which is the businesses and the organizations that make those things run. So we are going to follow in this September series theme, and that theme is Heartland Rising, the Ohio communities that are taking charge of their own prosperity and how yours can too. Specifically, today we're going to talk about energizing your entrepreneurs. I wanted to share briefly as we get started into this, one of the things, one of the theories behind how we shaped this month's work is the Community Capitals Framework. And so the theory in this, which is put out by Extension, the Cooperative Extension Service nationally, but the focus is what are the resources and the assets and the capital that's already existing in your community, and how do you harness that to produce the best outcomes for the people that call that community home. And ultimately, what you're shooting for is healthy ecosystems, vital economy, and social well-being. And so they talk about 7 to 8 capital categories. Some of those are tangible, like financial capital, like built capital, that is the buildings and the streetscapes and so forth, as well as the natural capital. And oftentimes in rural communities, the natural capital is a real asset. Then you have informal or intangible capital, like cultural capital, human capital, social capital, and political capital. And oftentimes when you're trying to get really to unlock the capital, the assets, the resources that exist in your community, a really important place is to start with unlocking those intangible capitals, like human and social capital and cultural capital. And what better way to do that than to energize your entrepreneurs and the innovators in your community. And so that's why we're starting this series off thinking about entrepreneurship. And when I thought about who could I invite that could help us talk about that topic, I couldn't think of anybody better than Deb Martin. Deb is the Program Development Coordinator for Great Lakes Community Action Partnership, and she'll be talking specifically about the Entrepreneurial Communities Initiative, along with her colleague, Roberta. Great Lakes RCAP, it serves a multi-state region and focuses on everything from rural water and wastewater issues to other community and economic development assistance and local government in rural areas and small towns. Also included is a lot of community planning, economic gardening, entrepreneurial ecosystem building, loan programs for businesses, and much more, and including even doing international work in civil society work overseas. So with that, I'm going to, as an introduction, I'm going to now stop sharing my screen so we can have an informal conversation with my friend here, Deb and Roberta. So I would love it as we get started, and folks I'll do a moderated several questions at a moderated portion of this, and then we'll open up for questions here in a little bit. But to start us off, Deb and Roberta, would you be willing to share a little bit about yourself and your background, just as a way of moving into this discussion?
Sure. So as Eric said, I'm Deb Martin. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. So I have been working in small communities. I grew up in a small community. I've been working in small communities for the last 28 years. During that time, have been in, hundreds of small communities. And, so would like to think that I have picked up a little bit of information. Roberta has worked for over 20 years with me in many of the, small communities. And, one of the things Eric mentioned, that we do international work, and one of the things that, is really fascinating to me is no matter what country we're working in, and and when I look at the communities there and the communities here, the challenges are almost always the same, and communities are always really surprised when we're able to connect them at how much they have in common, because many people internationally think of the US as, oh, it's a rich country, and, our problems have nothing to do with, their problems. And, it turns out that, almost every small community faces similar kinds of challenges, regardless of where you are. And so, so that's one thing that's really fascinating to me. I've worked with small communities in project development in water and wastewater for a number of years. I served as the director of our program for about 20 years, and just recently decided in the last couple of years that I really wanted to go back to, we had grown so much over that time that I felt like I was getting further and further away from the actual work that I love, and more, into just sort of the administrative side of things. And so I decided that, maybe it was time for me to step down as the director and just go back to, finishing out my career doing the things that I just really love doing, which is working with small communities. So yeah, I made the change. I had an assistant director for, most of those years that I was the director. And so I felt like, it's time to give someone else a chance. And so now I'm back to working directly with communities and doing the things that I just really love doing. So.
Great, thank you so much. Roberta, do you care to share about yourself and anything about your organizational context, GLCAP, that you want to share?
Well, I think that Deb did a really good job of covering most of it. I just want to say that I've appreciated all the opportunities I've had over the years working with Deb to do this kind of work. It's been a great career choice for me, even though I kind of just sort of accidentally fell into it. But yeah, the organization has been good to us because we're sort of an outlier in the community action world. So I can't add much more. I mean, my background when I took this job was in environmental science. So I started out doing environmental assessments for some of our water and sewer projects. And then I continued to grow working with small communities on those infrastructure projects. And then, 5 or 6 years ago, when Deb came to us and said, I really want to do this entrepreneurial ecosystem building stuff, we've got to find a way to fund this. I was like, sure, what the heck? Here we are.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, again, thank you both so much for being here. And I'd mentioned that one of the things that just really impresses me with your work is the Entrepreneurial Communities Initiative. And you've mentioned, entrepreneurial ecosystem building. Maybe you could demystify that term a little bit, and then share with us about the program and what do communities get out of it? What do they do that are in the program?
Sure. And, just for the record, we really try to avoid using the term entrepreneurial ecosystem building when we're actually talking with our communities, because that's, I think you're right that whole, terminology creates this sort of mystery about what the heck does that even mean. So, what we tend to talk to communities about is, finding ways to better support their entrepreneurs and helping their entrepreneurs or their business people to grow, because people in communities definitely understand small business and how important it is to them, but they don't necessarily understand entrepreneurial ecosystems or what that means. And so basically it's just about creating the support systems that are going to help people in businesses in the community to grow, and to be able to do the best that they can. You know, and it's about, you know, there are so many things that community leaders can do to help support that are really not very difficult to implement. I mean, you know, one of the things that I think is really critically important that I think doesn't necessarily always get enough attention is creating the culture of entrepreneurship. And I think that, you know, particularly in small communities where everyone knows everyone, failure is a really scary thing for a lot of people that are aspiring entrepreneurs. You know, that fear of failure, being in a town where you're going to run into people at the grocery store and at church and, you know, all these different places, and everyone will know that you failed. You know, I think that creating the culture that understands and accepts that that is just part of the entrepreneurial journey. You know, lots of businesses are going to fail, and, you know, those that are really good and really serious about it are going to make that a learning experience and come back better the next time. And sometimes those failures are necessary to get to the eventual success. So I think creating the culture where that's okay, you know, is really important, and creating the culture where young people can see that this is an option and it's a good, viable option in their communities. I think it's just really important. So, you know, we try to really emphasize, you know, work on, you know, the youth, and not just existing businesses, but those that may be aspiring to own businesses. Or, you know, how do we create a culture that, you know, really accepts entrepreneurship, and, you know, where people see that as a really viable option for themselves. So that's, you know, one thing that I think is really important. I mean, there are obviously lots of other things that community leaders can do, but, you know, like I said, in terms of, you know, creating the culture, you know, just trying to, you know, promote stories about different businesses in town and entrepreneurs, and, you know, how they contribute, and, you know, those kinds of things, I think just really helps raise the awareness for people. And, you know, doing things like, you know, the buy local movement and encouraging people to buy local, you know, that's something that community leaders can, you know, implement without a lot of money, or, you know, those kinds of things, and educating people that when they support their local businesses, how that keeps, you know, money circulating locally, you know, much more so than if they're buying online, you know. And granted, they're not going to be able to get everything that they need in their community, but even making them more aware that, you know, the more support they can give to those local businesses, because those are really the, you know, the people that give back to the community too. So there are lots of little things I think that can be done, and that's part of, you know, the whole process that we use. So
Herbert, I wonder if you could maybe follow up on that. Deb mentioned process, and I wonder if you could share, like, you know, what does that process look like? You know, what are communities, where do you start with the community, and where do you go next?
Yeah, so what we have learned over the last several years of implementing this program is that those communities that, whether they do it organically or it's through a specific process, those communities that sort of create an identity and vision for themselves for the future have been the most successful in doing this work. So with all of our new communities now, we talk with them early on about the need to create some sort of vision, either for themselves as this group that's going to do this work, or for the community. So we have some groups that just are very insular and just do the work themselves. And then there are others that are like, no, we want to talk to the entire community about this. So we've done a number of different types of community engagement surveys, youth engagement surveys, visioning workshops. We do a number of focus groups and interviews with entrepreneurs, as well as we try to get into the schools. talk to service organizations, other social service programs. I mean, we want to blanket the community and get all of their input so that we can see, you know, where the real strengths of the community lie and where are the easiest places to start building this idea of creating a more entrepreneurial community. And it doesn't have to be just around the business. I mean, just having an open and inviting community is also very important. So creating a community where people want to live is just as important as creating a community where people want to come and open a business, especially now with all of the growth in the remote work area. I mean, rural communities have so many opportunities right now to grow and to thrive if you can position yourself in a way that makes you appealing to people like me who have lived in the city my whole life. And there are a lot of people who are looking to move into a smaller community because they feel safe, it feels more secure, and they just want an opportunity.
And, you know, the cost of living is much lower. And I mean, there are lots of advantages that I think small communities can market themselves with, you know, that they really haven't in the past. But, you know, one of the things Roberta mentioned that, you know, when we do all these focus groups and, you know, one-on-one interviews and those kinds of things, you know, we're really trying to, like she said, get at, you know, where are the strengths right now in the community and, you know, how different people can be involved. And, you know, so one of the first things we do when we go into a community is we talk with them about putting together a group that will sort of, you know, shepherd this whole process. And we really encourage them to involve as broad a cross section of the community as possible. So we want to see, you know, entrepreneurs as part of the group. We want to see, you know, those entrepreneur support organizations, like if they have a local chamber or, you know, maybe someone from the SBDC. I mean, it differs in every community, but, you know, we want to see the schools involved because we, again, want to promote that, you know, youth entrepreneurship and youth, really making sure that communities are engaging their youth, because when they do, they find lots of good things that happen as a result of that. So, you know, we really try to encourage that. So, you know, ideally we tell them, you know, we want to have someone from the schools, you know, we'd like to have, you know, some entrepreneurs, some people from entrepreneur support organizations, some people from the local government, because, you know, in many cases, you know, we're going to need their support. And then anyone else, you know, depending on the community's vision, you know, we have people that are, you know, from the Tourism Bureau that might be participating, or the Parks District. Extension people participate in some of our committees. So, you know, depending on who is available, we have bankers that are involved in some of them. So, you know, getting as broad a cross section of the community as possible, I think, is really critical for any community that wants to do this, because one of the things that we have definitely seen in communities is the communities who have been most successful are those that really do have that broad representation. Because what happens is, you know, many times lots of people are doing lots of great work in rural communities, but they're all doing it by staying in their lane. You know, I mean, everybody is focused on the work that they are doing specifically, and they're not necessarily thinking about how that connects with the work that everyone else in the community is doing. And so creating a venue where those people can come together and start to collaborate, we have just seen all kinds of things that, you know, just organically grow out of, you know, things that we haven't suggested at all, but, you know, that are happening in these communities because they realize that, you know, hey, if we collaborated on, you know, this or that, and you know, it just, you know, to me, that's really where the magic starts to happen, is when you get people in the community really collaborating and really thinking of their work in a much broader way in terms of how it impacts lots of things in the community. So I would encourage any community as they're getting started to, you know, really focus on building a core group that is, you know, as broad as possible, that are willing to work together to build this.
Mhm. Yeah, I
Well,
apologize. I
that
kind of
shameless,
skipped over that part.
yeah, for a shameless plug in here for the following sessions. But so, for example, we will be talking about we have a guest speaker next week talking about placemaking and how to create that welcoming community. And you know, this is a colleague of mine in Extension, but has done some really fascinating work. So come back next week for that, because you know we talk about placemaking is an economic and prosperity strategy in and of
Oh,
itself.
absolutely.
And also you mentioned that you know the on ramp for successful entrepreneurship as a strategy is building the team and creating the vision and identity of the community. And so we will have I think Cassie's on the call here today, but she'll be coming in as a guest speaker and to talk about community heart and soul as one strategy they've used for that. So shameless plug, keep coming back, keep learning, because it really does work.
Yeah, and you know, all of those things are really connected. You know, I mean, you know, in terms of, you know, Roberta mentioned remote work and being able to attract remote workers and things like that. And, you know, doing those placemaking activities or doing the, you know, I'm familiar with the Heart and Soul program as well. And, you know, doing those kinds of things creates the kind of community that people want to live in. You know, so in terms of, you know, attracting new entrepreneurs or, you know, attracting, you know, entrepreneurial activity and those kinds of things, you know, having that livable community is a really critical part of that. So it really does all fit together.
Yeah, for sure. I wonder, Roberta, if you could share what's the end goal, right? So what's the outcome, the impact that you're looking for when you run the when you work with the community through the community entrepreneurial community initiative? What's sort of that impact that you're looking for?
Oh, okay. That's a tough question to answer. You know, we're very cognizant that each community is different, that each community starts off at a different place. And in my mind, like any path forward that I can create for these communities is a win for me. I mean, in the end, I would love to see communities that have thriving downtowns with eclectic businesses and the whole community is engaged in all kinds of things that are going on, whether it's through, you know, events or just having people walking on the street. I mean, ideally, that's what you want to see. And I think you can get there, but it's a slow process. So it's challenging to keep communities engaged because sometimes they don't see the fruits of their labors right away. So it's a tough road to be on with a community. And I honestly don't know that I would ever see a big gain in that way in my career, which is hopefully going to be winding down here over the next several years. But yeah, I think that getting people involved is a big win. Also, we've seen a lot of people come to the table who have never really talked to each other anymore. And we've heard a lot of people say, wow, this is so great. We've never been able to get into the schools, or we've never been able to talk to this group or that group. So just creating that safe space for people to come together and figure out how they can work together. I mean, for me, that's a win as well. I know Deb may have a different idea about what her ultimate goal was in creating this.
No, I think that's, I mean, I think you summed it up pretty well because, you know, we do recognize that every community is different and everyone is starting from a different place. So one of the things we try to do with the communities as we're looking at their vision and their assets, and, you know, we look at, you know, a number of different things, but we purposely kept this process really broad because we wanted to, you know, acknowledge those differences in different communities and the fact that each one of them will have different assets and each one of them will have a different vision for themselves. So as part of that visioning process, you know, we try to work with them on defining what are their measures of success. and so that's going to look different in every single community, I think, because it, ultimately whatever their vision is, and how they're able to implement that, I think it's important that they understand what would success look like for them. And it may not look the same. We just did not want a one size fits all program at all, which makes it a little bit hard to define in terms of explaining it to communities. But I think as they're doing it, and I think Roberta's right, it's difficult sometimes to, the building an entrepreneurial ecosystem is not something that is going to happen overnight. I mean, communities really need to be looking at like a 20-year horizon for this, and so, I think we have to look at what are the short-term successes, what are the wins that communities are starting to see, and, help them see those successes. But it doesn't mean that they, stop there, because, the goal is to just keep on building on that. And I think, one of the communities that I think is really fascinating is Fairfield, Iowa. And they have somehow, somewhere along the way, they were dubbed Silicon Valley by a journalist. Which I thought was really great. That sort of piqued my interest, and they did a webinar for us at one point, and it's just fascinating. They've been at this for about 20 years now, so I think they're a good case study in terms of what can happen. And it is just amazing, how many thousands of jobs have been created, and, how many companies have been created, but like I said, they've been at this for a long time, and, there were lots of different pieces of the puzzle that had to be put in place. And so I think that's probably one of the hardest things, is getting communities to understand that this is not going to be a short-term or overnight process at all.
Right, exactly. I wonder if you could share. I noticed. I think RCAP had a regional, or was it? A regional conference, and Columbiana was represented to come and talk about their experience with the program. I don't know if there's a success story from Columbiana, a business that expanded, or a entrepreneur that was attracted to start there, or.
Yeah, they have several actually. They just had their second brewery open in Columbiana, so that's pretty exciting. Columbiana is a town of about 6,900 people, 65 to 6,900 people. So not really a really large community, but they have had they actually are experiencing some population growth. And they have had a number of new businesses develop in the last few years. And they're, they've been really focused on doing more events downtown. And one of the things that I think, one of the, good things that's not necessarily tangible, but, one of the things that has happened as a result of this project is that there was a new development just, on the sort of the edge of the city called Firestone Farms, where there's housing and a golf course and, lots of businesses, and, and there was definitely some tension between the downtown business owners and those business owners in the Firestone Farms area, because I think the downtown business owners felt sort of, forgotten or left out, or, and I think now we've been able to sort of bring those groups together and help people recognize how everyone benefits and how the whole community benefits from all the different things that are going on. There was also never really a connection between the local government and the schools. And the school has an entrepreneurship class, and they typically would work on a project that would help solve a problem for business. But we, had really encouraged the young people to, to get engaged, and for the community to really try to engage their young people. So they worked with this entrepreneurship class, and during COVID, they really wanted to close down this alleyway and create sort of a corridor where there could be, you know, more outdoor seating for the restaurants that existed downtown. And so they basically turned it over to the entrepreneurship class to design what would this project look like. And it's called the Columbiana Corridor. One of the entrepreneurs that is involved in the committee, the Columbiana Progress Committee that we helped them put together, donated a really beautiful sign for the corridor. You know, the businesses have just been involved in a number of ways and contributing to what is now a really beautiful project. And the youth got lots of attention from the Youngstown TV station and from the press. You know, I think at one point they made the front page of one of the papers. And, you know, the young people were so excited about this and so excited about the fact that they had made a contribution to their community. And they made comments like, one day I'll bring my children here and show them. So, I mean, they really felt a part of something, you know, larger than themselves. And now one of the arts classes is working on creating some public art in the form of statues around the community. And we're again working with one of the local entrepreneurs who's agreed to donate, you know, toward this project. And so, I mean, that's what I mean by, you know, when people start to collaborate, really good things start to happen. And now the council has decided to create a youth council to advise them on matters that concern youth. And I know their chamber is looking at adding a board position for a young person from the community. And, you know, some of their other organizations are starting to look at, you know, how can they get young people in the community more involved. So I think that's a great success. You know, they've also created, you know, a little pocket park downtown and done some murals. They've done new streetscapes and music and so forth in the downtown area. You know, they also, one of their successes is we talked about, you know, the creation of pop-up shops and, you know, giving entrepreneurs an opportunity to sort of try out their products before they, you know, go all in on renting space and so forth. And so one of the building owners downtown created a space where that could happen, and, you know, offered some initial, you know, reduced rent prices and things like that. And so, you know, now they have a new antiques place downtown, and that shop owner there's also a cafe in there that's owned by someone different. And there are lots of products that other entrepreneurs are selling within the antique shop that gives them sort of a venue for selling their products. And, you know, so they've just had a lot of really, you know, good things that are, you know, maybe small things, but, you know, just lots of good successes that we've seen so far. And, you know, I really feel like this is just the beginning for them. I mean, because they've got a lot of really good ideas, and, you know, I think they just really, you know, they have done enough that the other communities in the county that are, you know, in close proximity to them have started to ask them, what are you doing? You know, because they see that things are happening there and that there is momentum. And so we started having other communities request to join the program because they saw what was happening in Columbiana. So we've now added the city of Salem, the village of Lisbon, and hope to, in the near future, add East Liverpool. So all of those communities are in Columbiana County, which is great because, you know, ideally what we would like to do is create sort of a regional ecosystem where, there are things that small communities might not be able to afford on their own. But if a number of different communities could contribute, then, everybody can benefit. So ideally, we start with them, and we want to help each community advance on its own, but we also want them to think about how could their neighbors be involved and how could we make this more of a regional effort.
Yeah, that's fantastic. What a great story, right? It takes time to
And
build, but
Roberta,
then
I don't know if you want to add anything about Columbiana that I might have missed.
No, I think you covered a lot of it. The one thing that always sticks with my mind in my mind though is that the city manager came to me one day and he's like, "You're not going to believe this." He said, "I've got businesses calling me because they want to locate like in our downtown, and I tell them, this really isn't the kind of business that would work with our downtown." And they tell them things like, "Well, we don't care. We just want to be in your community somewhere. So just find me a space." And I'm like, "Wow, that is amazing." I mean, that's like what you want people to do, is to say, "I want to be in your community. I don't care how you get me there." So,
Yeah, and they were actually, during this process, they were actually named by Reader's Digest as the nicest city in America. So, that was great because of the collaboration that they have had. They were also named one of the top 25 Hallmark Christmas towns. So, and one of the things their city manager has been really great about is, they have these contests in Northeast Ohio for like the best brewery, the best salon, the best, things like that. And he is really good. And this is part of what I was talking about in creating the culture. He is really good about making sure that their businesses get nominated. And so they've had a number of, they had a salon that was named, the best salon. The brewery, the original one that they had, was named, best brewery. So I mean, just doing those kinds of, small things to help bring attention and publicity and so forth to the businesses that you have makes a huge difference.
mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
great strategies. I wonder if we could have a couple of minutes. I think sometimes when you're in a community hearing these stories, it's inspirational, but also can be daunting, right? Well, I'm not, that's not me, right? I've got these challenges. And I wonder, you kind of hinted at this, Roberta, but maybe you could go into more depth, either of you, but what are some of the challenges that you've seen communities wrestle with in trying to build entrepreneurial ecosystems?
Mm. Engagement is always a problem. A lot of, especially early on, whenever we start talking about we need to engage with the community, there's always like, no, we don't want to put anything out there because this person's going to say this and that person's going to say that. So I guess there's a lot of community culture things that we kind of have to work through and navigate a little bit. And surprisingly, I've had a lot of pushback from councils. Like they don't want to look at themselves in the mirror. Nobody wants to do self-reflection, right? It can always be a little painful. So it's like making them sort of look at the things that could be improved and how are we going to go about it, doing that. And they always feel overwhelmed, like they don't have the money to do these kinds of things that need to be done. So just kind of working through those pain points for individuals, it is a challenge. Um, We've had several communities that never really launched. Initially, we had 3 or 4 other communities in the program that, were not able to pull themselves together. It's a heavy lift to ask these communities to pull these partnerships together and to get on this path and to stay on the path. And it's okay, if people sort of move in and out of the groups. That happens over time as things begin to change and morph. And not everybody can stay involved in a committee for 3 or 4 years. Like the group in Columbiana is very solid. They work together all the time, even outside of this group that we've created. So they're a very tight knit group of people. I don't have that in other communities, so it's sometimes a challenge to keep things together and to stay on the same road.
Some of them I think are getting there, though. I
Yes.
mean, it takes some it takes some time to find the right people, to be involved. And sometimes, the initial people that were identified aren't necessarily the right people, and so I think it takes some time to figure out, who really is in this. But, like Roberta said, it's sometimes, there might be one person on council or the mayor or, someone that's all in, but, sometimes they are, sometimes fighting against their own people. So, there's always some of that. And like she said, some communities just have not been able to move beyond that, but the ones who have and who are, building really solid groups, I think are really starting to see the benefits of doing that. So, what I hope is that more communities will recognize that, and I would say that one of the other challenges that we see pretty much, in so many communities is that too many communities are sort of just sitting back, letting things happen to them, and waiting for and hoping for a savior. And, I think, our message to them is, nobody's coming necessarily to save you. I mean, it is up to you to do what you can, even when those things are small. And, I always, try to get the message across to communities that the more things that you can do for yourself and the more you can engage people to create at least some momentum in your community and get people to notice that something is happening in your community, then the more attractive you will be to those outside funders. But, thinking that some outside funder is just going to come and hand your community money to do something, just is not very realistic. So it doesn't mean that, outside funds aren't needed. But I would say to any community, start wherever you are, whether that's at ground zero, then fine, start at ground zero. Start with some small thing, some, beautification project or, something like that you can get a few volunteers that are interested in a particular thing. I mean, we did this in Moldova, which I don't even know, that was a former Soviet republic, for those who may not know where Moldova is, because lots of people don't. But, they started with, really small projects that people said, our parks could really, stand to be cleaned up or, and so they started with things like that, and now, and then they built on that. And that's the thing is, even if you can start with something really small, like getting somebody to donate some paint, so that you can paint the park benches and clean up the area and plant some flowers, I mean, that is something that allows people to see that something is happening, and there are lots of other, tons of other small projects that can be done that, start to create that feeling in the community that something is happening. And, that I think does more to engage other people than anything else, is when they see that, something is happening here, well, then more people want to be involved in it.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. As I'm reflecting on what I'm hearing, if I could share back some of that, see if I'm hearing this correctly. And then I'll invite us to think through, okay, if somebody's listening in, they're wondering, so what's my first step, right? So I want to address that question, right? But just as a way of processing what I'm hearing, I feel like sort of some of the themes I'm pulling out of this is, one, you've got to have collaboration. And so a group's got to, or a community needs to, it starts with a core group of folks who are committed to working across those silos, find the synergy and move forward together and create that vision and help to start to build the identity. Another theme that I'm hearing is, it's got to be community wide, so there's got to be deep engagement at all different levels, schools, from schools to you name it. And then, I feel like there's some specific strategies that I'm hearing, such as, okay, so if, maybe it's a building owner downtown, can they do things like support the local entrepreneurs by doing a pop-up strategy, or how do we get resources to support entrepreneurs? And if we can create the place through placemaking, create the environment that where businesses want to come and locate, all the better. So those are some of the themes I'm hearing. And then the last point there that I've heard you make was momentum is really key. And so start wherever you are, start there, but do something. And as momentum grows, then you start to get interest from the outside potential resource partners. I don't know, am I hearing what Entrepreneurial Communities Initiative is about?
Yeah,
Right.
I think that's a really good summary. And, if I could just add one thing to that, I would say that it is really important, and one of the reasons we do as many one-on-one interviews with entrepreneurs as possible, and we hold focus groups with, if there is a manufacturing base or, those kinds of entrepreneurs in the community, we might do a focus group of, them and a focus group of Main Street type businesses, so I would say that in any community that wants to do this, listening to your entrepreneurs is going to be so critical, because, most communities don't have the resources to do, 50 different things to support their entrepreneurs, or 25 different things, or maybe even 5. And so listening to them about what they feel they need most and what would be most helpful to them, what services that exist right now have they used in the past, and if they're not using them, why not? And, because we often find that there is a real disconnect between what the entrepreneurial service organizations think that entrepreneurs want and need versus what we actually hear from the entrepreneurs in terms of what they need. And so, we want to hear directly from them. What do they need? What would help them be more successful? And those are the things that I would encourage them to really focus on and figure out how they can do that better.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. And I imagine you, Roberta, do you have like a structured way you do that? Going to talk about resources in a little bit, and maybe that'll be one of the things you can mention. But yeah, so interviews, how do you do that with your entrepreneurs? Would be great to know. And then I do want to make mention to folks, Roberta and Deb's work is vital, and we know that because they have a whole chapter dedicated to their work in the is it St. Louis? Is that the Federal Reserve of St. Louis? I think it is.
Yeah, it was
They
St.
wrote
Louis and the regular Fed Board of Governors
There you go.
that jointly did the project.
Yeah, so there's a book on rural prosperity, and there's a whole chapter dedicated to entrepreneurs, building the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And the feature there is Deb and Roberta's work. So these are folks to learn from for sure. Yeah. So maybe we could talk about that. Maybe specifically, what does an interview look like and how you do that, and then broadly, maybe Roberta, you and Deb could talk about resources. And I do have some resources that I'll pull up so you can talk through those.
Okay. So, it's just a standard focus group that we do. And we have a series of questions that we typically work with the committee on to say, okay, what do you want to know? There are some that I make them ask. And then there are some that, we try to ask, but we typically find that the focus groups, they tend to lead themselves. So we have the questions there to help us, but a lot of times the conversation just goes in different directions, and we just tend to be pretty flexible with that, because especially like Deb mentioned, you need to listen to the entrepreneurs. So if I find that this is something that they really want to talk about, then I'm going to let them talk about. And it's really important for us to capture all of that and make sure that we're continuing to put that in front of the committee all the time. Especially when they start talking about a particular idea, it's like, yeah, that's a great idea, but your entrepreneurs have told you this. So constantly reminding them that this is what the people are asking for is key. And then in terms of identifying the local assets and resources, sort of building that entrepreneurial ecosystem, we do go through an activity with the committee where we try to identify all of those groups. So I do a lot of research ahead of time because I know what the state resources look like. I can get a lot of information about county resources. So I really focus in with them on the local resources. And we put together a map. So I have, a Word document that I do where it's kind of got circles and it's got all the financial resources. It's very visual, very colorful, so that people who like those kinds of things can just look at it. And then what goes along with that is another sheet that has all of the information about those individual resources. So their websites, their contact information, their hours, what services they provide. So they do actually get a document that identifies all of those things that entrepreneurs can use. One thing that I haven't started working on yet, but I've had people ask me for, is sort of breaking down some of those resources by, is this a startup resource or is this a more business management type of resource? So I have to start reflecting on those kinds of things, because for those communities that are getting people asking about starting businesses, they don't need to get this big list of stuff. People don't have time for that. They don't have the patience for that. I mean, I know there's a lot of information online and you can send people down a rabbit hole that they'll never come out of. And that's very frustrating. So I try to keep it pretty succinct and just to identify those things that are really key for people to know.
Okay, and then Deb, maybe you could help us out with those. Some of the other resources that people can access as they're starting on their journey, and then what's kind of like that first thing people should think about doing?
Well, I would say, the resources that we listed, I think the Main Street program has created some resources that I think are really helpful. One is that they have sort of a self-guided, a guide for communities that want to do this on their own. So, I would definitely start, with that. They also have an ecosystem audit tool that I think we felt was particularly helpful, because it does include some of those elements of placemaking, like, does your community have third spaces available where people can collaborate? And does it have, so I mean, it doesn't just look at, what resources are there for entrepreneurs, but what are the resources in general? And so I think that's also a really good starting point for communities, is to, that they can look at that and kind of assess, which areas they're stronger in and which areas they might need to shore up a little bit. The Kauffman Foundation, they're really well known for entrepreneurship and their entrepreneurship programs. They have an ecosystem playbook that I think is useful for helping to understand what are the various elements of an ecosystem, and what those mean, and how you might start to think about what you have in those areas. There's also the local entrepreneurial ecosystems toolkit by Cameo, I think is really useful. If you go to the Ecosystem Builders Hub, there's lots of useful information there. And then the Kansas City Fed has been really focused on growing your own, and entrepreneurship-based economic development for a long time. So I think reading that publication, I would say any and all of these things would be really helpful places to start. is to just have a better understanding yourself. If you want to start this, this is now I understand what it is I'm trying to do. And then I would say focusing on finding the right people to collaborate on this is that's what I would do as the first step, is figure out, who has an interest in this. And again, making sure that you've got, a broad cross section of the community. Don't forget about your nonprofit organizations and, your schools and those kinds of organizations, and not just the entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurial service type organizations. So, and I would definitely say, make sure that the local government, at least someone from the local government, is involved in this, because I think it's really helpful to, and certainly, if you have a community foundation, getting someone, like I said, it's really looking at, we've had a number of churches that have been involved in different committees. It's really, just a matter of finding the people who really have an interest from a number of different angles. But I think, for me, at least, in my opinion, and looking at, communities over, many years, I think that entrepreneurship as a strategy for economic development for smaller and more rural communities is just an excellent strategy, because, regardless of whether you want to look at, rural tourism or, energy related kind of development, or agriculture and local foods, or a combination of, most communities have to do, a combination of a number of those strategies, or, the arts and placemaking kinds of things. What is really at the heart of all of those things is, to make them work, it takes entrepreneurs. And so that's why I feel like, working with entrepreneurs is just so critical, because, regardless of what development strategy you want to pursue, entrepreneurs are going to be critical to being able to move it forward.
Yeah, that's a great point, and what a great summary. And it's hard to believe that our hour has gone by. I really want to say a special word of thanks. Deb, this has been insightful, and Roberta as well. Thank you so much for the wisdom you bring, all the experience that you brought as well. Any last words or reflections, Ambrose or Amber, and then it'll be time to wrap up.
I just want to thank Deb and Roberta for joining us today. This has been really, really insightful and helpful. And I think we probably need to have some follow-on conversation, because a lot of what they talked about really intersects with some of the things that we've been talking about and working with over these last a few weeks even. So thank you.
Yeah, we would love to do that. So.
And for me, you spoke to my heart the past hour. As far as the space in the CED, that's where I started with the community engagement and like local and neighborhood business districts and things like that, and mobilizing that as the base for the greater or larger redevelopment projects and strategic planning kind of things. So my heart is full. I thank you. I look forward to working with you guys. And Eric and I have been talking about building out even more some community resiliency and development. And some of the things you talked about today just confirms that we're on track. And we'll be running those ideas by you as we build that out even more.
Great. Well, we would love to work with you guys. So.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah. Again, thank you, Roberta. Thank you, Deb. And we'll be in touch. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And this has been another enlightening session of CED Office Hour Live. And again, join us next week and the week after. We'll keep unpacking different aspects of the conversation from today. I mean, downtown was mentioned, engagement was mentioned, visioning was mentioned. I mean, these are the top placemaking was mentioned. These are the topics that we'll keep drilling down on in the weeks to come. But thank you again so much, Deb and Roberta, for opening this up. And I think you're exactly right. Entrepreneurs are key to all the rest they might look at. And so this was just the right topic and the right duo to set the table with talking about entrepreneurship. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And thanks for inviting us. And we look forward to continuing to work with you.
Definitely. Definitely. All right. Thank you.
All right. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.